So, hello friends, I'm still reading out of this book. They All Love Jack. Continuing on the Parnell frame-up. This seemingly innocuous ad was in fact the precursor of one of the filthiest conspiracies in British parliamentary history. Every Department of State was marshalled as required in the plot against Parnell, and that included the Criminal Investigation Department at Scotland Yard. Throughout the latter period of 1888, the government conspiracy ran in parallel with the Ripper, uncannily so, almost on a day-to-day basis. Anderson had gone on holiday on the day Polly Nichols was murdered and returned to London on the day of the double event. Anyone who believed he was genuinely vacationing in France might not quite have a grip on what was going on. The two chiefs of Metropolitan Police, Sir Robert Anderson and Sir Charles Warren, were respectively concocting evidence in order to destroy Parnell and destroying evidence in order to protect the Ripper. In both cases, the motivation of these God-sodden zealots was to safeguard the perceived interests of Her Majesty's ruling elite. The House of Commons looked like what it was, a museum of conservative well-being. Indifferent to anything but its own self-interest, Parliament belonged to wealth and was rotten to its sanctimonious marrow. Arthur Balfour, promoted by his uncle Salisbury to Secretary of State for Ireland in 1887, famously said, "It doesn't matter which party is in office, the Conservatives are always in power." And nobody was arguing with that. Balfour quickly established his credentials as a dictatorial bitch. Known in some quarters as Pretty Fanny, he soon acquired a change of name in Ireland, where he was known as Bloody Balfour. His complicity in the Parnell conspiracy was already well advanced. Most of it was conducted in secret, but as an overt element he was poised to introduce a new coercion act that would practically make it illegal to be Irish, or more specifically, an Irish nationalist. Under these new statutes, any person could be arrested for any reason or without any reason, and imprisoned indefinitely without trial. Protest was irrelevant, as the protection promised in habeas corpus was no longer applicable. Viscount Salisbury had written, "A more arbitrary government that was not squeamish about forms of law, or particularly about hanging the wrong man occasionally, might succeed where previous legislation has failed." Cunningly synchronized to coincide with the introduction of Fanny's Act, something of equal odium was on its way out of Fleet Street. On 18th of March, 1887, The Times printed the first of a series of 7 articles titled "Parnellism and Crime," authored anonymously with escalating venom and published between March and May. Their litany of accusation caused the required sensation, stunning Parnell's friends and delighting his foes. It was no accident that The Times had been selected as the vehicle for the destruction of the Irish leader. If something was in the world's greatest newspaper, it had to be true. And on that chill London morning, as Parliament assembled, it looked as if the game for Home Rule was up. Parnell's domestic organization was known as the Land League, and out of it had evolved the plan of campaign. Both outfits were dedicated to ameliorating the lot of Ireland's agricultural workers, resisting the imposition of punitive rents and summary evictions by the thousands of those who couldn't pay. Both were popular with the people, and although they achieved only minimal reform, they were rather too successful for those with their hands in the Irish till. With spectacular hypocrisy, Balfour declared the plan of campaign a criminal conspiracy, then nipped down to Fleet Street to organize his own. The first installment of Parnellism and Crime was an omen of the ill to come. Dismissing whatever legitimate advances the Land League had made, the Times put its spite in like a hooligan's boot. It was a tirade of libel designed to force Parnell into one of Salisbury's courts. If he sued, he'd lose. If he didn't, he was guilty. Be the ultimate goal of these men what it will, squawked the Times. They are content to march toward it in the company of murderers. Murderers provide their funds, murderers share their inmost counsels, murderers have gone forth from the League offices to set their bloody work afoot and have presently returned to consult their constitutional leaders in the advancement of their cause. Over the next 8 weeks, Parnellism and Crime continued to bludgeon the public with ever more ferocious propaganda. It would accuse Parnell of every conceivable felony, every violence he abhorred and struggled to rectify, he was now blamed for. Impugned as its instigator down to the last renegade bullet. That worthless man, Victoria called him, who had to answer for so many lives lost. Indifferent to the 1,000,000 Irish dead on her own rap sheet. Yelling "murderer" in Parnell's face and goading him to sue, the Times was anxious to keep a focus on the slanders. Unless further steps are taken to bring the matter before a court of law, it proclaimed with bogus rectitude, it is difficult to see what more we can do to prove our own good faith and the charges we believe to be true. No deal from Parnell, who would put the faith of a tapeworm before that of the Times, knowing full well that in respect of Ireland, there wasn't a judge in the kingdom who wouldn't pimp for Salisbury and his government. Lack of traction caused the Times to change tack, switching from Ireland to the supposed terrorist contacts Parnell maintained in the United States. The last 3 articles in the series were titled "Behind the Scenes in America" and were compositions of unleashed bigotry. When the first of the articles appeared, it was accompanied by the facsimile of a letter claimed by The Times as part of its as yet unpublished evidence, which has a most serious bearing on the Parnellite conspiracy. We publish one such document in facsimile today and invite Mr. Parnell to explain how his signature has become attached to such a letter? Written a week after the Phoenix Park murders, excusing his public condemnation of the crime and distinctly condoning, if not approving, of the murder of Mr. Burke. The assassination of Thomas Burke, together with Lord Frederick Cavendish in Phoenix Park, Dublin, on 6th of May 1882, was one of the most infamous murders in all Ireland's history. Burke was permanent Under-Secretary at Dublin Castle, and had acquired the hazardous reputation of being a devoted and most fearless servant of the Crown. It was for precisely that reason that an extreme faction of the Fenians known as the Invincibles had an order of execution on the castle rat. The unfortunate Cavendish, who had been newly appointed viceroy, happened to be walking with him as the Invincibles struck. Both were slashed to pieces with surgical knives. What made the event particularly tragic, and fuel for the screech of the newspapers, was that Cavendish was a benevolent and compassionate man, whose plans for reform would have brought glad tidings to Ireland. Instead, the nation stood accused, energizing conservative fury for ever more repression. With customary venom, the Times sank to the occasion, recommending that the innocent Irish population of England should be massacred, and Irish leaders blamed for an outrage at which they despaired. So, God save